get through as many as we will get through as many as we can in the next half an hour. Okay, so as many of you probably know, this all started through the Recovery Through Retrofit effort, which was initiated by the Middle Class Task Force out of the Office of the Vice President. That task force identified 3 major barriers standing in the way to greater use of and investment in home energy improvements around the country. And what they identified as the 3 major barriers were a lack of consumer information, a lack of standard workforce training and certification standards, and a lack of access to financing. And so the announcements last week at the White House really focused on addressing all 3 of those types of barriers. And the one I'm going to be talking about today is specifically consumer information and how we are hoping to help address that and get consumers interested and motivated to make improvements in their homes, since that's what we're all interested in. So in doing that, we developed the Home Energy Score, which is a quick way that a homeowner or home buyer could find out how a home is doing in terms of its major energy systems and envelope. It allows comparison between homes, regardless of location in the U.S., and provides basically a standard way that a qualified assessor could come into any home in the U.S. and collect about 40 pieces of information, enter it into our home energy scoring tool, and then develop the output. And that output is an asset score ranging from 1 to 10, recommendations for improvements, some tips, and also just for tracking purposes, a list of the data inputs that were used by the assessor. So if the homeowner or home buyer makes improvements to the home, then hopefully those inputs would change, presumably, and then their score would change as well, hopefully, if they've made improvements that actually result in energy reduction. This is the first piece of the the first piece of the home energy score output. It's the actual label or graphic, whatever you want to call it. It provides information about what that home is projected to use in terms of MBTU's total energy use in source energy, with a bunch of assumptions about who's living in the house and how they use the house. So it basically standardizes how you would evaluate any home in the country by saying that there are 2 adults living there, 1 child. They set their thermostats at certain levels during the day, at night, and it standardizes all of that so you really have an apples-to-apples comparison between homes. It provides the address. It provides what climate zone the home is in. The country is divided into 19 climate zones, and so the BTU range that is represented by the 1 through 10 varies. So if you're in climate zone where Minnesota is located, obviously they would be using a greater number of BTUs than if you're in San Diego or another temperate climate. So an 8 in Minnesota, as I said, or another cold or harsher climate, will be allowed to use a greater number of BTUs than if it was the same home in a temperate climate. And there are a bunch of caveat language down here saying how it was calculated, and also other assumptions that were made about how we calculated that. It also provides a reference point for that climate zone and for the homes in that area as to if you were in the top 20% of similarly sized homes. We broke homes up into 2 sizes, basically greater than 2,200 square feet and less than 2,200 square feet or equal to, and gave you a reference point based on REX data that we used to calculate that. I'm having trouble with my screen. I apologize. This is just showing you the front page of the home energy scoring tool. As I mentioned very quickly earlier, you have to be a qualified assessor to gain access to this tool. I mean, anyone could go to the home page here that I'm showing you here, but to actually get into the tool and input information about a home, you'd have to demonstrate that you were well qualified. And to do so, you'd have to show certification by a ResNet provider or BPI, and you'd also have to take a training module on the web, which we will make available to those who show that that they are certified for those requirements, and they also have to pass a brief test. So I'm going to go through these. As I'm going through these pretty quickly, at the end I'm going to take you over to the website because I think that would be useful for you to see where a lot more information is available about the tool and about the whole program. So last week's announcement was basically announcing the Home Energy Score, which I already mentioned what that is, the scoring tool, which was developed by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and DOE in concert, and also 10 pilots that we are initiating over the next and completing over the next 6 months. We're partnering with cities, states, and utilities in different climate zones around the country. I've listed the states here. It's not the entire state in any of these cases, but in some cases it's multiple utilities, in other cases it's just one. And we're testing different types of things in each of those locations. So the next steps we have in terms of how we're moving through the pilot stage and beyond is that right now we're in discussions with all the pilot partners to finalize their pilot design. We had a general idea of what they were committing to already, but now we're really getting into the nitty-gritty about the timing, scope, what they're going to be analyzing, how they're going to be collecting data, what kind of quality assurance approach they're going to be using to ensure that you have qualified folks going in, not just that they're certified, but that they are actually using the tool correctly and uniformly and consistently across the board. And you see here it also says the role of USDA, the Department of Agriculture, and HUD, Housing and Urban Development. Last week, as part of the announcement, HUD announced a new tool, a new financing mechanism called Power Saver, and that will allow an additional financing capability to be tested around the country, again, over the next, I don't know how long they're taking to do that, but they issued a request for qualifications, I believe it is, that financiers could submit their qualifications and say that they're interested in providing this type of funding, the Power Saver funding, which I think is under Title I, and basically allowing homeowners to have a source of funding available to them to make improvements. And it can be done either with the score or without the score. It's a complementary effort, although the two do not necessarily have to go hand in hand by any means. But in some of the cases, I think our pilots are interested in the HUD financing tool, and so we will be working with them to, if financiers apply in those areas, we will be working with them to make that financing available to homeowners in those locations. The reason USDA is involved is that we're working with some of the rural electric utilities, and they've already been doing a lot of great work in home performance with Energy Star and other home improvement programs, and home energy improvement programs, I should say. And so we're working with several of their partners in electric utilities to make this available to rural communities around the country. In those, I should say, not exactly around the country, but in the specific pilot areas that we're working in. So the pilots will be implemented from basically January through June. We're going to be doing analysis along the way, but also, completing it in the summer, figuring out what kind of improvements we need to make to the home energy score and what we learn from all the data collection. As I said, there's different types of questions being analyzed and tested in each of the locations. There's some overlap, but in some cases, a provider might be using diagnostics, and we need to see what the results would be if you use diagnostics versus you don't use diagnostics, what kind of score and different kinds of recommendations you might end up with, because that's something we're still considering, the role of diagnostics in all of this. We want to know what consumers think, what homeowners think of the score, whether it actually makes a difference in motivating them to make improvements, how quality assurance works. There's just a whole range of issues that we're interested in understanding, including improvements that we need to make to the scoring tool. In the fall, we hope to initiate a larger national rollout once we've made those improvements. So with that, I'm going to actually go to the website. Or I guess first I could take, why don't I take questions if anybody has some questions that they've sent in. Colleen, has anybody sent in questions yet?
Sure. Glenn's going to read a few.
The first one was, why not go to zero for a zero-energy home?
Well, you do go to zero, although the best score on the scale is a 10, and a 10, as I said, in different parts of the country will equate to different levels, but you know, it might be from 0 million BTUs to 80 million BTUs. And so it does start at 0, but you're right, you don't have to use zero energy or zero net energy to equate to a 10. You can use more than that. And the reason that we didn't make a 10 equal to only 0 is that it's just very unlikely that, you know, more than a handful of homes around the country would score a 10 in that case. And we think that this is something that should be motivational, that it shouldn't be too easy to get a 10, but it also shouldn't be impossible, and it shouldn't be just those people that are going to, you know, extreme or great measures to do so. We want to motivate others as well. I think there's ability to do that with a 10 being equal to a very small amount of energy, but not necessarily just 0. I realized that when I signed up for this, I lost my connection to the website, so I have to plug that in. Sorry. And the website is homeenergyscore.gov. So if you go to that, or you can just see as I'm going through it. But actually, I'm sorry, was there another question? Should I go through a few more questions right now? Glenn?
Joan, do you want to take another question, or did you want to show the website?
It depends on, are you getting a lot of questions? Or just
I can knock out a couple of these right quick for you. One question was, are the assessors going to be limited to the pilots? To start with, yes. How do we calculate the energy upgrade costs? Those are based on a measures database that's been built by the National Renewable Energy Lab, and the tool is tied into that for those upgrade costs. And then the next one is, are we seeking feedback or comments? And we are indeed, although I don't know where to do that.
I'll send in a follow-up email. I will be at homeenergyscore@fra.com. So I'll send you that email address to all the attendees, and you can send any comments or questions to that email address.
Great, thank you. The other thing I should say about the cost analysis for the recommendations, so it basically is a national average that that NREL came up with by collecting data from lots of different sources on energy improvement measures and what they cost around the country. Since we don't think that is necessarily going to be representative of what a specific homeowner is going to find in their community, we didn't actually put the cost on the set of recommendations. We do provide a payback, so somebody could, you know, calculate it if they wanted to bother with that, but we didn't really want to make that something that people saw up front, given that, you know, they will likely get a different answer when they call contractors in their community. So as I said, you've got the home energy score label or graphic or whatever you want to call it. Here, in this case, this home scored a 6. It's based on its current condition. If they make the improvements that are recommended, it would score an 8. And this is the gross savings that they would achieve, basically the annual reduction on their bills, on their annual utility bills, if they make the improvements that are recommended by this assessment. I already told you, I think, the total energy use, I think I already mentioned, that's based on really specific behavioral assumptions about, you know, who's living there and how they're using their energy, so that you could really be able to compare between homes. So if you go to the website, as you see on the left, there's, you know, information for homeowners. There's information on testing locations, so if you're interested in learning more about the specific pilots, you can go there, and they're all listed here with brief descriptions as well as contact information for those folks who are running those pilots. If you are a qualified or certified energy professional, you can go to the home energy, well, you can go either way, but you can learn about what the requirements are to become a qualified assessor, where you'd send that information, and as I think Glenn said just now, you basically, we're only allowing assessors to join right now for use of those skills and in the pilots. So basically, if you're in a pilot area and you want to perform assessments for those pilot homes, you would contact the pilot first, and then they would let us know that you're going to be involved, and then you'd send us your qualifications. Once we receive proof that you've been certified, we would provide you access to the home energy scoring tool. And for those folks, just so basically the scoring tool training, I should say, the training for the scoring tool includes a whole module explaining the tool, but it also includes a test. But if you click here at Home Energy Scoring Tool Assessor Training, you would pull up this, which is basically a PDF presentation of what's in that assessor training module. So anybody can see what's in the training, you just can't see the test. So that, basically we can see if you really were paying attention or not to what's in there. And I think it's about, 40 slides or something. Let's see. Yes, 38 slides. So basically it goes through the entire tool. It explains, what everything means, how we, not how we came up with every specific item, but it explains enough that a qualified assessor could go into a home, know how to use the tool appropriately, and also be able to communicate with the homeowner if they had questions about what it all meant. Okay, so if I go back to the web, there's also down here, and this is in a couple different places, there's a data collection sheet. It's also a PDF. If you pull that up, you will see exactly the kind of information that the tool requires the qualified assessor to put in. So as I said, it's about the envelope, and it's about the major heating and cooling systems in the home. So this is several pages long, but you get the idea. If you want to learn more about what you'd actually be asked, then you can go to the data collection sheet for that kind of information. I think there was one more thing. Oh, the energy. This is on the first page. I'm sorry. If you go back to, I think it's the home energy page. Down here, there's a sample label and other information. I pulled these up ahead of time so that they wouldn't take so long. But basically, this shows you what the tool will be providing. It provides the home energy score graphic telling you where you score today and where you could score along with the savings associated with those improvements. It provides tips, which is just generic. It's basically the same list of tips regardless of who you are and where you are in the country. And then it also provides the specific home energy upgrades that are recommended to this specific home based on this specific assessment. So the one thing about this page is that if the qualified assessor is providing this assessment as part of a larger program, like Home Performance with Energy Star, or they're using a different software tool to generate recommendations for the home based on a lot more information that they're collecting on the home, then this page is optional. Basically, if you're going to be providing additional recommendations through a different software tool, we felt that it was fine to do that if you're collecting additional information that's not required for the asset version. And we didn't want to confuse homeowners by giving them, separate sets of recommendations. But the recommendations from the tool are broken up into what you can do now and what you should do now to save you money. Shows utility bill savings, simple payback, greenhouse gas reductions. And then the second set of recommendations are really replacement recommendations. So if you are ready to replace your furnace or your water heater or other piece of equipment, windows, it basically directs you to purchase one that is energy efficient, that meets Energy Star, if that is an Energy Star covered product. And the reason these are separated out is that the savings that you see here under the second list, the ones that you recommend when you need to replace equipment, those are really based on incremental costs of the improvement. So it looks at, if I was going to buy a furnace today that costs, in this case, anything, let's say I was going to buy one that costs $500 more to get an Energy Star one versus one that is not Energy Star, it looks like I would recoup my savings in just over 3 years. But I think what it's telling us here is that it probably would take you less. So the estimated savings on the utility bill would be $160. It looks like probably it won't cost me quite that much to buy one that's a little bit more efficient or a lot more efficient. And so you're generally going to end up recovering your costs in 3 years. Okay, so if I go back to this page again, there's information on how we calculated all of this, how we came up with the tool, what it all means, and there's a list if you're really interested in knowing exactly how we broke out the different 10 points, regardless, I mean, depending on where you are in the country. There's a table here that shows you million BTUs and how much you can use to get a 10 in New England versus in the Southeast or versus in the Southwest or wherever in the country. There's also a lot more information and documentation if you want to go to a Google site that I'm not going to go to here, but it's something that Lawrence Berkeley put together with us, and they primarily manage that. It goes into a lot of detail in terms of information about the home energy scoring tool. It also goes into, I think you can also find information on Home Energy Saver, which is basically the same engine that's used for the scoring tool is the same engine that's used for Home Energy Saver and Home Energy Saver Pro. I should mention, as long as I mention those tools, that one nice thing about this as well is that if a homeowner wants to get the label and score, they can do so. They can also automatically have that information uploaded into Home Energy Saver or Home Energy Saver Pro, where they can provide a lot more information, like lots of information about their actual operational use. So they could get customized recommendations that way that actually take into account a lot more information about their home. The reason that we limited how much information you'd need for the score is that we felt like it was a good amount of information, a good enough amount of information to give you a good sense of how a home performs. But it's also not so complicated that it would take hours and hours to collect the data. So basically, as it's designed right now, somebody could go into your house, collect the information in about an hour, and generate the recommendations and score. Okay, I think that's all I really needed to show you guys on the website. Did we get any more questions, Glenn or Colleen?
Yeah, we have a few. So I'm going to read them again.
Yeah, there was a question about comparing the score between regions. Basically, can you do that? How will it work? I'll let you field that one, Joan.
You can. Basically, actually, I shouldn't have gone back to that. Let me just try to remember where it is. If you look here at the energy use points, if you were in, let's say, let's pick a harsher climate. So let's say you're in the Great Lakes area and you score a 7. That means that you could basically use up to 183 million BTUs, somewhere between 156 and 183 BTUs in order to score a 7. But if you were in Southern California, where it's very mild, you'd actually only be able to use up to 129 million BTUs in order to score a 7. So what we're saying there basically is that we think that the home that scores a 7 relative to its climate in Minneapolis or wherever you are in a harsher area is equivalent to the home that's using a lot less energy, but it's in a much more mild climate, because obviously it takes a lot more energy, much more energy to make you the same level of comfort in Minnesota or in North Dakota than it does in South Carolina. So we put those on sort of a equal footing by setting the BTU levels differently in different climate zones. Are there additional questions?
Yes, one question here. What level of BPI or ResNet certification is required? For BPI, it's building analyst. For ResNet, it's Rater, and I think we're still considering the HEST. Is that right, Jim?
We are considering the Home Energy Survey
Professional.
Is that right? Is that what it's called?
Right.
Yeah, and I'm talking to ResNet about that, and we are evaluating what it is that those folks are trained to do. I think if we're not going to require diagnostics, which is something we're testing during the pilot phase, then probably a Home Energy Survey professional will be, perfectly qualified to do so. But that's something we're still figuring out. It's something we also will test during at least one or more of the pilots, where we get people with different levels of expertise to go through the same home and see how they all match up.
Another question is, does the scoring tool consider renewables?
It does not.
Several people have asked, where is the information on the website for the pilot states? I'm not sure where that is.
It's under, oopsie, I just actually hit some weird button that took me somewhere. Testing locations. It's under testing locations, and you'll see in Allegheny County we're working with Efficiency PA. They're doing something a little different than the others, where they're doing a home energy. They're doing a house tour where it's basically often done, I think, by the real estate folks, and they're interested in incorporating energy efficiency, highlighting that as part of this year's house tour, and they're going to do something with a score involving that. In Cape Cod, we're working with Cape Light Compact. They already have a very active auditing program, and so they're going to incorporate the home energy score there. I'm not going to go through all these, but we have several counties in Colorado that are working with us, the Local Energy Alliance program in Charlottesville. In Indiana, let's see, Indiana, also in Virginia, I should say, part of the Virginia pilot, but also Indiana, South Carolina, and Texas, we're working with the rural electric utilities. Minnesota, they've already been doing lots of energy audits, and they're incorporating this into an existing program. Omaha and Lincoln, as well as the Colorado counties, were Better Buildings awardees from DOE, and so those are the two that, I guess I should say three, since it's Lincoln and Omaha, that also are doing Better Buildings. It's a retrofit improvement program and grant program that DOE funded under the Recovery Act. We're working with the Energy Trust of Oregon, and I think that's everyone. Any more questions? I'm sorry, I can't see these.
Of them. Just to let you know, we're not answering all of them. We will answer all the questions here, and we will post them to the website.
Okay.
In particular, there have been several questions about auditors being compensated and what does this cost?
Well, it's going to be a market-driven effort, just like most efforts in this country. And so if, it depends on how it's being done. If it's through a utility, then they probably have a cadre of people that they're using and who they pay, who are either on staff or not on staff as contractors. If it's independent folks that eventually are doing this, on their own, then they would be paid directly by the homeowner. And in some cases, obviously, there are incentives to do audits in certain locations. So this is not a full house audit. I should make that very clear. It's an assessment of a home's energy performance, and it really would depend on where you are, whether a homeowner would have to pay out of pocket or get some of it paid by someone else. We're generally not funding, I'm saying generally because I haven't worked out all the details, but we're not really funding the pilots. These are interested parties that wanted to do this with us, and so they already had existing programs that we're feeding into. That said, 2 of them were already DOE grantees, so there is money going to those regardless of whether they do the pilot or not.
Okay.
Joan, we're still getting the question about whether it's site energy or source energy. It is source energy.
Okay, so it is source. Basically, let me just show you again. The total energy up here is based on source, and it's calculated based on a national source conversion rate. But if you go to this page, these estimated utility bill savings are really based on site energy reduction, and then it's using an average state utility cost to calculate that. So that is state-based, and I should say that the greenhouse gas reductions are actually based on what region you're in. So that is not a national source number. It's using local or regional source numbers that we're getting from eGrid. Okay, next question. I apologize. I just can't see the question, so I can't just automatically respond.
Sorry, and I'm trying to drive and pay attention at the same time, and I'm not doing it very well.
That's okay.
You guys? Go ahead.
Could you forward them to me so I could see them, or?
I don't know how to do that.
Okay, forget it.
It says, when will the low-interest loans be available to the homeowners?
I'm not sure about the timing of what's it called, Power Saver,
okay.
But you can find out a little bit.
I think it's towards the year.
Toward the end of this year?
I believe so. I think they're talking about another month or so.
Okay, well, if you go to related links, and I don't know exactly what's on here, but the Power Saver fact sheet will tell you. It doesn't look like a fact sheet, actually. It looks like a lot more information, but it looks like if you go here, you can get, read the news release, consumer FAQs, lenders FAQs, so you can find out more about the Power Saver pilot program. If you go to our related links at the bottom, there's information there. And another part of the announcement last week was the workforce guidelines. So if you're interested in that, that's also on the related links. That's something that DOE did, collaborating with industry, Department of Labor, and EPA. To generate these guidelines. They basically go through all the different major types of energy improvements that you can do in a home. They analyze them in terms of what steps you need to take to make those improvements, what standards you need to meet. If there are, they didn't create new standards, but they referenced ASTM or ASHRAE or whatever was relevant. And then they also turned that information into a list of knowledge, skills, and abilities that a skilled worker would have to have in order to perform that perform that work adequately. So if you click there, it takes you to this very long document, which is under review right now, and I think people are welcome to make public comment, it looks like, through January 7th on the guidelines. And they are just guidelines. They're not meant to be mandatory. And I should say that about the home energy score. It's completely voluntary as well.
We've got one here. Is the program representative or the DOE verifying and approving the assessor's credentials? The DOE will do that. Roughly how long would this audit take for qualified assessor to complete on site? For most houses, it should be less than an hour. Will you allow the auditor or assessor to perform work on the house? I'll let you field that one, Joe.
We haven't really worked out the details of that kind of conflict of interest, and since we're really focusing on the scoring part of it, not the. Obviously our interest is in getting people to do the retrofits, but I don't know that we've really thought through whether there should be those kinds of conflict of interest issues that we should raise, and it's a good point. I just have not thought about it because we're just in the pilot phase. But I know that many programs, Home Performance with Energy Star and others, work through those issues, and so it's something that we'll have to figure out as well. Do you want to add anything to that, Glenn?
No, that sounds good to me. Will the BTU range for each score be based on a percentile of homes at a single point in time, or will it be a moving range over time?
It is not based on a percentile of homes. It's based on what we understood to be the spread, a reasonable spread in a specific area that's covered by each of those 19 climate zones. And we did a lot of analysis to come up with those ranges, but that's something we also have to really test in the pilots to see if, in practice, if we're getting, what kind of range we are covering with the scores. If everyone's scoring, 6, 7, 8s, then, or everyone's scoring 2s, then we may have to reevaluate. But it's not meant to be a scale that adapts over time. We did allow there to be room for improvement, so I think getting a 10 is, we think is going to be pretty difficult, but this number will change over time. The top 20% of similarly sized homes score here or better. That reference point, hopefully that will change over time as more and more homes become more efficient. So it might be that they become a 9 instead of an 8 or something like that. Although I really don't think it's going to change quickly by any means, unless there's massive, investment in home energy improvements in a specific area.
We've got 2 more we'll throw out there, and then we'll call it a day. Why no obvious connection to this tool to be used at point of sale?
Well, it definitely can be used at point of sale. It's not that it cannot, and it's something that we're considering with some of the pilots. Right now, I think our focus is trying to get people to make energy improvements, and that really can happen at any point, whether it's a homeowner who's living in their home who just moved in or somebody who's buying. It's certainly something that we're interested in, and we've talked to home inspectors and making it possible that they could provide this service at the point of, when they're doing home inspections. There's certainly a lot of nervousness, I think, by some parts of the real estate community and realtors that, they don't want anything that will hold up a sale. And I don't think it really would. I think that, it's just additional information that would be provided, and it's certainly not mandatory. So it's something we're considering, but it's not, necessarily, or it isn't an area of focus. It's just one of the ways that you could do it. We kind of want to prove it out first before we, just like we're proving it out in the pilots and making adjustments. I think we feel the same way about starting with homeowners and moving towards the possibility of expanding to home buyers at a later date. And it really is driven by what people are interested in, what they do in different communities.
And then one more, I think we've hit this one in other webinars, but I don't think we've gotten it here, is how does this relate to HERS and why we didn't use HERS instead to do this?
Well, to get a HERS score, you basically need to, have an extensive assessment or audit done on the property. And so, it's costly, it takes a lot of time, and we wanted something that could be done in a much shorter period of time, give people a rough estimate of how they're doing. It's meant to be something to get you in the door, get you interested, and hopefully get folks to start making improvements. While HERS has done a great job in the new home market, particularly as it's linked to energy incentives with new homes, I think it clearly has a role to play, but I think this also can play a role. We're basically just trying to ramp up the interest and investment in energy efficiency improvements. And so I think the two can work hand in hand. We spent a lot of time with ResNet talking to them about how that can happen, and I think that they're pleased with what we've come up with. And obviously we're still figuring this all out, but to some degree. I mean, I think we figured out a lot of it, but I think we're still tweaking it around the edges. But I think the other issue is that, or not issue, but the other big distinction between the two is that you get a much more detailed number with a HERS audit, and you don't get that here. You get basically your 1 through 10 here. You don't get 8.2 or 7.5 or and so you can get a much greater level of detail and granularity if you go with HERS than you do here. And that's why there's a cost difference as well. So it just serves a different market. Okay, well, I really appreciate so many of you calling in. and I hope you found this to be a good use of your time, and we will try to get back to as many questions as possible and get those up posted somewhere on the web. Our web people have told me they don't like doing frequently asked questions, so I'll have to figure out how I'm going to do that, but we'll do something. If not, we'll just email you guys separately. And if you have any more questions or comments, I know that Colleen's going to follow up with you and let you know how you can raise those with us. So thank you very much.